Wow, we're up and running, and it is the day after the establishment's celebration of the resurrection of Jesus, which is a good thing. And here we had a bright sunny day, and yesterday I noticed that there was a proliferation of absurdities out there, rabbits producing eggs and that sort of thing. But that's what makes this world so much fun. It's a constant source of amusement. And how are you this morning or this afternoon, Stephen?
I'm doing great. Actually, yesterday, Phoenix was asking a question about why the rabbits were associated with eggs, and we really don't have a clear answer for that. But it's kind of funny to watch the kids when they finally start to wake up to that curiosity. What's going on with the rabbits and eggs? And there's not really an answer. So.
Well, it's all, I mean, again, this is the activity of the mind, especially the mind that is imagining itself to be an ego, is that we are constantly driven to understand. But really, when you get enough distance, when you back away from things far enough, you realize that none of this stuff can be understood, because most of it is absurd when you really reduce it down to its bottom content, and that even slides over into realms like nuclear science, because empty spaces and negative and positive charges create all of this. So we've got a universe built on duality, opposing forces, always in antagonization to each other, and in reality, nothing is really there. So we built a brilliant trap, and guess what? We ate the cheese, and we are trapped. But thanks to Jesus and his capacity to pull it all together after that horrific event on the cross, we are being led to the realization that none of this is real, that we created it. And so then a beautiful thing occurs. The peace of heaven begins to descend upon us. And that's where we're at in finalizing this chapter 13. It's the final passage, section 9. You want to start us off, Stephen?
Yes, I will. So it starts off saying, forgetfulness and sleep and even death become the ego's best advice for dealing with the perceived and harsh intrusion of guilt on peace. Yet no one sees himself in conflict and ravaged by a cruel war unless he believes that both opponents in the war are real. And I feel like we already did this part of this section, actually. I think maybe we were at the bottom of this section when we left off. Does that sound right, Chris? And you're still
muted. It's okay. There we go. I think that we started it, but I don't think we got that far down in it.
Sure. Well, that's okay. We can just start off wherever seems right.
I think the communication link that God himself placed within you.
Okay.
That seems
right.
Pretty much on point.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and start with that one then. So, the communication link that God himself placed within you, joining your mind with his, cannot be broken. You may believe you want it broken, and this belief does interfere with the deep peace in which the sweet and constant communication God would share with you is known. Yet his channels of reaching out cannot be wholly closed and separated from him. Peace will be yours because his peace will still flows to you from him whose will is peace. You have it now, The Holy Spirit will teach you how to use it, and by extending it, to learn that it is in you. God willed you heaven, and will always will you nothing else. The Holy Spirit knows only of his will. There is no chance that heaven will not be yours, for God is sure, and what he wills is as sure as he is.
Well, that's pretty much an empirical statement there, in that there is no chance that heaven will not be yours, for God is sure, and what he wills is as sure as he is. That's pretty much putting the final nail in that coffin as to whether or not you can access the peace of God. And I know that that was one of the early stages of really coming to a new level of being fully lucid as I was working with the Course in Miracles, was to recognize that if I could stop the ego's brain chatter and silliness and chasing its tail kind of mentality, if I could slow that down, and if I would reach out and ask the Holy Spirit, all of a sudden it would descend. That peace of God would be like being out in a very parched desert, and all of a sudden this gentle rain begins to fall. So I think this is one of those stages within A Course in Miracles that you arrive at, where you suddenly realize how real and how tangible the Course is, that you're not just having a philosophical dialogue or reading something that is purely theory, or is something that is beyond you, that you have to go out and struggle to attain, because that peace of God is a component in your understanding of the Course in Miracles that really brings it all into complete focus, completely lucid.
Yeah, well said. And I feel that that when he talks about in this passage about extending peace in order to know you have it, and that's a really key part as well, because if we get caught up in like searching for something or searching for peace, seeking it out just for ourselves, we may not get as far as if we were just focusing on extending it to everyone around us. I mean, that's how we know that it's already within us, basically. And that's what it's saying, is that by sharing it with others, that's how you realize it's in you.
Yes, that's the only way you can realize that it is within you, is that you, one of the most brilliant examples in the Bible is Jesus is in the boat out on the Sea of Galilee, and all of a sudden the storm comes up, and the apostles decide, well, maybe we should wake him up, because Jesus was taking a nap, and he was probably sleeping very peacefully, oblivious to the whole idea of a storm. But when he finally is awakened, he looks around, and it's like, well, you guys, you're just willing to take this crap from that ego side, but let's fix this. And he's brilliantly states, peace, be still. And that's our armament. That's what we walk into any storm with, is that assurance that we can declare peace, and peace will become manifest. It is there for us to use as a way of bringing everybody back to a state of oneness.
Yeah, absolutely. And think about the empowerment of that statement, and being able to have that sort of dominion over our mind, really, and be able to still your own mind. I think that's the main challenge for most of us.
Yeah, it actually is, because it's all happening in the realm of mind. And even though it appears to be, our surroundings in the physical world, as I said earlier, the physical world, when you really stop to look at it, it kind of vanishes upon closer inspection. So that next section, you will learn salvation because you will learn how to save. It will not be possible to exempt yourself from what the Holy Spirit wants to teach you. Salvation is as sure as God. His certainty suffices. Learn that even the darkest nightmare that disturbs the mind of God's sleeping son holds no power over him. He will learn the lesson of awakening. God watches over him and light surrounds him. And that's, just reiterating what we were just saying. The storms in life that come along are transient and ephemeral and not based on truth. So eventually the sky will clear and the sun will be restored. And, if there's a bad outcome to one dream, you can rest assured that you will awaken somewhere else and be able to confront that dream the next time with full empowerment. So it's a journey that has no loss factor. You cannot lose in the game we are playing with the ego.
Yeah, very well said. And it's always about, I feel, these practical steps we can take with the Holy Spirit to empower ourselves through the dream while we still believe in the dream that's occurring. Then we take those, sort of like walking us through these baby steps towards a higher and higher level of awakening, and recognizing that over time that this is of our own making, and understanding that at deeper and deeper levels. So it's the more depth with which we understand that, I feel like the more true power we have over it.
Yeah, absolutely. The more we become awake within the dream, the more we experience a lucid dreaming, and I think, again, Jesus and perhaps Siddhartha, the Buddha, both were, brilliant examples of lucid dreaming, because they arrived at that plateau where they were healing people and feeding people and transforming things. So they were very much empowered within the dream. And that's what, that's one of the final stages that we will awaken to collectively, is that we'll reclaim our power while in the dream so that we can bring the dream to its only logical conclusion.
And that's going to be really cool and exciting stuff for us too.
It is. Yeah, absolutely.
And the next paragraph reads, can God's Son lose himself in dreams when God has placed within him the glad call to awaken and be glad? He cannot separate himself from what is in him. His sleep will not withstand the call to wake. The mission of redemption will be fulfilled as surely as the creation will remain unchanged throughout eternity. You do not have to know that heaven is yours to make it so. It is so. Yet to know it, the will of God must be accepted as your will. I feel that, in other words, heaven is already there. It's already your home. But in order to become awake to that and aware of that, you actually have to synchronize your will with God's will, come into that alignment with it.
Yeah, and it's it's merely again dispelling an illusion, because when you believe that your will is not God's will, then you're listening to the voice for the ego, and as is restated over and over again throughout the course, the ego and all of its ramblings is not real. So you're listening to something that really isn't there. So ultimately, you're going to arrive at the point where your true understanding of who you are makes it impossible for you to not share your will with God. So, and I know for me, one of my favorite little affirmations that I pull up and use over and over again is, my will is to will God's will, just as a way of keeping me on point with that, keeping me striving to stay conscious, stay lucid with whatever activities I'm involved with.
Yeah, and it's actually somewhat of an ironic idea as well, if you consider that there's this idea that you could ever will against God's will, because that would be insanity. to think you could will something other than what God wills, because we're extensions of God. So if we're extensions of God, we must be of his will. It just makes good sense to be in alignment with that. And it's going to feel better too. You're going to feel happy. You're going to feel relieved. You're going to feel more effortless when you're, I almost feel like I'm advertising for God's will right now, but it's true.
Yeah, we ought to make an infomercial about this. That might be something that, we could put together some sort of a thing you can get in the mail. You could get your own very profound epiphany around God's will if you just send us your credit card number, and we'll happily package that up and get it out in the mail for you tomorrow.
Right. This might be kind of a perversion on it, but you can always go within and align with it.
Yes, well, we don't want
free.
that. We don't want that secret to get out there, at least not yet. And that's the core of that whole philosophy around the secret.
Right. The secret with which is that you can just be happy for free because you're loved by God.
Right. And Jesus gives us a little insight around that when he says, don't sweat it. God is very much aware of the fact that you have need of certain things, and these things will appear in proportion to your need for them. So once we stop thinking about worst outcome scenarios and anticipating stepping into a state of lack and putting all of our emphasis on restoring ourselves to being fully aware of God's love, then all of the other parts of our lives come into alignment.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll finish this section out with this final paragraph, and it says, "The Holy Spirit will undo for you everything you have learned that teaches that what is not true must be reconciled with truth. This is the reconciliation the ego would substitute for your reconciliation to sanity and peace. The Holy Spirit has a very different kind of reconciliation in his mind for you, and one he will effect as surely as the ego will not effect what it attempts. Failure is of the ego, not of God. From him you cannot wonder, and there is no possibility that the plan the Holy Spirit offers to everyone for the salvation of everyone will not be perfectly accomplished. You will be released, and you will not remember anything you made that was not created for you and by you in return. For how can you remember what was never true, or not remember what has always been? It is this reconciliation with truth, and only truth, in which the peace of heaven lies." And again, that really has a lot of that vibration of some of the songs that the Beatles were putting out back in the 60s about that whole idea of love. And the only thing you'll take with you when you leave this world, or when you awaken from this world, is all the things that were created in love, and everything else you won't even have a wispy memory of.
Yeah, and I love the idea of sameness that's in that last paragraph too, because it's basically saying that when you do remember heaven, you come back to that, you receive it, that the truth is that you've always been there, you've never left, and God sees you as still there with him. But it's up to you to return to that state of awareness. And I think that that's really cool, because in this world, there's not really a sense of stability. Everything is based on flux and differences. Even I think when people talk about financial stability or, emotional stability, things that gravitate around that idea, then it's not really going to be permanent until you factor your true origin into the equation, until you return to that state in which God created you. There's just not stability to be found in this world without that. So
Yeah, it's a realm built on shifting sand. So every time the wind kicks up, it's like being out in the middle of a bunch of sand dunes, and all of a sudden, your sand hill becomes a valley, and all of a sudden the neighbor has your sand hill, and you've got the empty space. So, and that's the way the ego has designed this world. That's the whole point of this world, is to keep that illusion going and to keep us trapped into the idea that we're not complete and that we don't have everything we need at all times. So, and we've seen this, this whole process being worked out through so many different venues, through so many different avenues over the period of history. But the truth always emerges in the midst of even the greatest turmoil, even the darkest hour. And people who are willing to, or who are actually actively pursuing finding that truth, they will recognize it and rise above the situation immediately. So that's the beauty of a course. A lot of people keep it in that realm of just being a psychological treaty, but it goes much, much deeper than that. It is a source of the miraculous, within that sense that your life flips over from being struggle and turmoil, and you actually enter into a realm that is referred to as the happy dream, where you may still have problems that you encounter, but by and large, most avenues that you pursue, most things that you are drawn to, most situations, and most of the people that enter into your life come in a state of peace and come in a state of supportiveness. So you're no longer drawing conflict to you. You're no longer drawing this combative realm that everybody on Facebook is always wailing and beating their chest about. Oh my God, we're doomed. Well, as soon as you put that anchor in there and say, my God, then you have to remove the other end of it, which is we're doomed. As long as you're with God, there is no doom in sight.
absolutely, and that's an absolute truth. So, so did you want to pick up somewhere else, or were we gonna break off for today?
Well, it was a short episode today, but why don't we finish it off at this point, and next week we'll start up with a whole new chapter and examine it from different angles, just to see how juicy it is, because every chapter definitely has its own flavor.
Yeah, that sounds great. I actually want to mention something that since Lori and I will discuss different ideas in the course, something that was brought up was this whole idea that if first there's God, and then God's extending that perfect love, creating his son, in his likeness, how does, it's just that question that keeps popping up, is like, how did this tiny mad idea even come about? How did all this kind of erupt from what was a state of perfect love? And I kind of feel like it's almost a rhetorical question, because it's almost like, in truth, you are still in perfect love. You are in heaven. And so I'd be curious to hear your response to that.
Well, I think that first we have to go back and address the idea of power. And one of the things is that we have a tendency to diminish ourselves when we're sitting in our ego. And we see ourselves as being powerless. But the power of the mind is so immense, is so indescribable in many ways, that all it took was a momentary hesitation, that, millisecond thought of what if, because there was no pre-planning, there was no anticipation. And there was certainly no attack on God that was in the heart and the mind of God's child. But God's child, like any child, is always going to be, contemplating what if. And so there was this wild, insane idea that came up: what if I was not a part of my creator? If I was not a part of my father? And within that instant of that thought, an entire realm literally burst into being. And so when you start looking at the realm that burst into being, it becomes a matter of simple deduction. If you are with God, you are in a state of perfection. If you have removed yourself from God, then you're entering into a realm that is antithetical, that is the opposite of God. So God is harmony. This realm has to be chaos. God is love. Well, then this realm would have to be hate and fear and anger. And God is life. Well, then this realm would have to be death. So it just goes on and on and on. Mm-hmm. And God is a state of known wholeness, completion. So within that, the first thing that happens as we enter this realm is we have duality enacted. We have male and female that comes up, and then all the other separations. So all of it, if we go back and look at it from that perspective as, not a rebellion that occurred in heaven, but merely the fact that the mind is so incredibly powerful that one momentary thought would create a phenomenon that is spread out over billions of years is, from the ego side of the fence, astonishing and humbling and, beyond the realm of comprehension. But our true state, we're still in heaven, we're still at peace. And while the dream is being capped up and finished off, it gives us a sense of the power that we have within our state of grace within God. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. That's beautiful. And I think that the thing that maybe sometimes is sort of trippy to consider is that, well, if God is everywhere and God is love, then really God's love is here. It's just that when we're starting to see all the forms come up and all the things that are representative of that tiny mad idea, I think it can get a little bit confusing if you're seeing those things together. If you're seeing God's love and then you're seeing chaos right next to each other, in a sense, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it definitely, it calls us into that search for the understanding of the enigma. And yet, in reality, when we're in this realm, we are not capable of fully comprehending the nature of God. We can have discussions about it and share visions around it, but the truth is the depth and breadth of God is so foreign to the way that we think when we're in the material world that we have to drop out and go into that area of non-thinking in order to get a sense of being reunified with our true identity, our true nature. And so we're constantly pulling weeds out of a garden that is astonishingly prolific. And every time you pass a judgment on anybody around you, oh, look at that jerk over there. He just, backed over his neighbor's kid's bicycle. No matter what the illusion is, the passing of judgment is to water those weeds. So you're going to just continue to pull weeds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we want to come into that viewpoint that we're all the same love underneath it all.
Yes, and every beautiful sunset and every magnificent mountain peak and every cresting wave in the ocean and every hummingbird and everything that is magnificent and beautiful was at the core of its being is that love in expression. And the shell that surrounds it, that decays and falls apart, is testimony to the effect and the power of the ego, which is ephemeral. So the ego is turning into dust, even as we're trying to prop it up and keep it alive.
Mm. You know, I think that I'm starting to understand where that issue was lying, and that's in something that the Course mentions, that the Holy Spirit will use contrast in the realm of duality to teach us about our true nature. So it will use duality to show us truth.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's again where it goes back to Jesus telling us, let he who has ears hear and he who has eyes see. So we're seeing it reflected back to us everywhere. We're hearing it on every street corner. But you have to start to not even want it in the strictest sense, but it's just the beginning of thinking that there's got to be a better way. That's the catalyst that gets us back on the road. That's the way to the Tao.
Yeah, and then as soon as, when I feel that when we receive God's love, that's the only way we'll actually be satisfied, when we fully comprehend God in the entirety.
Yes, and that's that peace of God that is restored. It's that's where we started out with this discussion today, is that whole idea of having the peace of God and to knowing it to the degree that whenever you enter into any situation, you can use that as your entryway, rolling out the red carpet. Here's my red carpet, the peace of God. So I can enter into the maelstrom and know that the waves will be quieted, the wind will cease, and the peace will be restored.
Absolutely. All right, Chris. Well, thanks for answering that and talking. I can meet with you then next week on Monday.
Yes, we will be off and running on a whole new section. And, if anybody has some suggestions, we're definitely open to that. So shoot us an email or post it on YouTube. And if you have something that either is, confusing or compelling, or in some way of it has grabbed your attention, shoot out a memo to us, and we'll see if we can address it in upcoming discussions.
Absolutely. I second that. Well, we'll wait a week then and start up again. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. And you have a happy week there in that beautiful region by the ocean. You can go down and smell the salt and the sea, and we will expect to gather here once again in 7 days.
Sounds good, Chris. Okay. Well, you have a great week as well.
Take care. Bye.